Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday to you. Thank you for coming to watch tonight for the live stream. Sorry it's a Thursday. It's a couple hectic weekends coming up in the near future, but next week should be back to normal on Friday. You can always support this channel by going to patreon.com/Hemant. And of course, you can subscribe to the newsletter by going to friendlyatheist.com. You could do that for free. I'm going to try to get to as many stories as I can. We also have Den here with us. He's here today and he's in the comments under the Friendly Atheist tag. So if you leave any comments, if you leave any super chats, anything like that, Den will check them out and make sure I see them in between stories. So please feel free to leave those comments. The first thing I wanted to talk about, this is kind of it's not quite breaking news, but this is something that definitely clogged up every social media feed I had because over the weekend there was this anti-abortion conference. They have it every year in Washington, D.C. It's called the National Pro-Life Summit. And one of the speakers there did something very, very disturbing, besides everything else all the speakers say, which is also very disturbing. I'm going to play it for you in just a second. Here's what you need to know. The speaker in question is a priest named Calvin Robinson, and he's a member of the Anglican Catholic Church, which is not part of the Roman Catholic Church we're all familiar with. It's part of an offshoot. But, like, why would you find a random priest from, like, a lower tier denomination of Christianity to speak at your event? Because he's really popular on the right. And this guy spoke, and Right Wing Watch was able to get a clip of this, and this went pretty viral for reasons you're going to see in a second. So let me play you the end of Calvin Robinson's remarks, and then we'll talk about it.
This is the last stand for Christendom. It's make or break time. The whole of the old world is crumbling. Every country in Europe is embracing death. America, as far as I could see, is the only country fighting for life. And that's down to you guys. So God bless all of you for what you're doing. Please keep doing it. I hope that I can encourage you. And my heart goes out to you. God bless.
Now, here's the question. Is he joking? I mean, sure, you could assume that's a joke, but what's the joke? He's obviously imitating Elon Musk, who basically said and did the exact same thing, right? Was it right after Trump's inauguration? But in what world do we start imitating the Hitler salute? I am not sure. But people on the right, the ones who don't know anything about history and never want to read about history, somehow think this is hilarious. So, what Calvin Robinson also doesn't realize is if you are Elon Musk and you're the wealthiest person in the world, you can do that sort of thing and there will be virtually no consequences for you. If you're Donald Trump, you can do whatever you want and there will never be any consequences for you. If you're not either of those two dudes, there will be tons of consequences if you try to imitate them and you do all the things you see your idols doing. And so what we have seen in the past couple of days since that happened is that there's been a giant fallout from what that guy did. Because I don't know if you've heard this joke before. What do you call a dinner or something that has one Nazi at the table? Or what do you call a gathering that has one Nazi at the table? And the answer is it's a Nazi gathering. Because guess what? If you allow that sort of person to be platformed on stage and all of you are just laughing and going along with it, you're all part of the same group. Historians have a word for people in the Nazi Party in Germany in the 30s and 40s who may not have agreed with Hitler, but they went along with him because, you know, maybe they wanted access, maybe they wanted power. And so they just went along with it because, you know, I disagree, but I have other thoughts. You know what the historian term for those people are? It's Nazis. You're all part of it if you go along with that stuff. And so what we've seen are people quickly trying to distance themselves from Calvin Robinson And interestingly enough, the anti abortion group that hosted him, I don't know that I've seen a response from them yet. Maybe I missed it. Maybe you could share the link with me if I have missed it. But as far as I can tell, they have not tried to condemn what he did. But let me share with you some of the people who have distanced themselves from him. One of them is right here. This is the Anglican Catholic Church. This is their website. And if you go to the front page of Anglican Catholic, they have a memo about Calvin Robinson. I'm going to scroll in so you could see this. This is from January 29th. They basically said they became aware of this post made on X showing the end of a speech made by Calvin Robinson at the National Pro Life Summit. He closed his comments with a gesture that many have interpreted as a pro Nazi salute. You know why they did that? Because it is. It's not a funny joke. It's not an awkward hand gesture that Elon Musk just made one day. It's because these guys think it's so hilarious to pretend to be a Nazi. I'm not sure. I don't understand Republican humor. But look at this. This is actually interesting. While we cannot say what was in Mr. Robinson's heart when he did this, his action appears to have been an attempt to curry favor with certain elements of the American political right by provoking its opposition. Mr. Robinson had been warned that online trolling and other such actions, whether in service of the left or the right, are incompatible with a priestly vocation and was told to desist. Clearly, he has not. And as such, his license in this church has been revoked. He is no longer serving as a priest in the ACC, which, oh my God, like the Catholic Church, you have priests who are molesting kids for decades, and nowhere will you see the church condemn it as clearly as this quickly, by the way. And look at what else they said here. Furthermore, we understand that this is not just an administrative matter. The Holocaust was an episode of unspeakable horror enacted by a regime of evil men. We condemn Nazi ideology and anti-Semitism in all its forms, and we believe that those who mimic the Nazi salute, even as a joke or an attempt to troll their opponents, trivialize the horror of the Holocaust and diminish the sacrifice of those who fought against its perpetrators. Such actions are harmful, divisive, and contrary to the tenets of Christian charity. You know who's never said anything that forceful? Any Republican anywhere in the country right now? They won't do that against Donald Trump. Donald Trump surrounds himself with Elon Musk. Elon Musk has like an office, I think, in the Oval Office at this point, and Republicans are like, he was just being awkward about it or something. So, I mean, I'm sure I have many problems with the Anglican Catholic Church, but on this statement, it is pretty forthright and pretty damning. And they're firing this dude from being a priest. What has Calvin Robinson said about all this? Check this out. This is what he said on social media. Thank you all for your lovely, supportive messages. To which I just have to wonder who the hell is saying, go you. I don't know. Yes, it does seem my license has been revoked. I cannot go into detail yet because I have none. I am obedient to my bishops and I have not heard from the archbishop yet, so I do not know the situation or what I am able to share. I learned this the same way you did, via social media. My parishioners have been on the phone last night and this morning expressing concerns about our parish ministry. Please keep them in your prayers. They are the priority here. I am their pastor. They are my flock. I will remain here for their pastoral needs, but I am worried about how they will receive the sacraments. First of all, you know how they'll receive the sacraments? They'll get another priest. It's not that complicated. All of you people are interchangeable. But the other thing is, if you care this much about your parishioners, why would you go on stage in front of a giant audience and imitate Hitler? In what world do you think that's just a funny joke to do? I don't know, but it's funny that you're like, you guys, you know who the real victim is in this whole Holocaust controversy? It's me. He also then said in a different post, because he needed to clarify this, for the record, in case it needs saying, I am not a Nazi. And let's just stop there and appreciate that for a second, because Normal people don't have to put out a statement saying that because no one would ever assume they are one. It's only people on the right who apparently have to go out of their way to say, ha ha ha, remember that joke I made? Well, I just want you to know I don't actually love Hitler. This guy. The joke at the end, it's always a joke, the joke was a mockery of the hysterical liberals who called Elon Musk a Nazi for quite clearly showing the audience his heart was with them. Context is key, but sometimes people ignore context to confirm their own prejudices. People see what they want to see. My attempt at dry wit in that typical British way, we could stop there. None of that was witty. None of that was funny. And this attempt to pretend that Elon Musk was not doing a Nazi salute when in context, if you watch the video, he was absolutely doing that. I heard what he said. He knows what he did. This is what he does. He just likes pushing people's buttons, so he does and says the most offensive thing possible. It's how all right wing humor works. It's just, what can I get away with as long as the people I'm offending are people I consider beneath me? That's why right wing comedians are like, I can use a slur for transgender people. I can use the R word to describe people with uh, mental problems or anything like that. I can use the N word. Like, this is what they do because they think it's okay to get away with it because it's supposedly transgressive. So, yeah, Elon Musk doing a Hitler salute is the exact type of thing you expect from a guy who wants to be a right wing comedian, but like most right wing comedians, doesn't actually know how to be funny, right? He's just surrounded by people. He bought himself a social network so people will just tell him he's funny, and he doesn't actually know what he's doing. I think my favorite example of pushback isn't just from the Anglican Catholic Church. It turns out that before Calvin Robinson was a priest of sorts, he ran, or at least before this current iteration of being a priest, he ran a social media company, not a social media company. I'm sorry. He ran a gaming company, and I don't know if they made video games or they wrote about video games, but the website is called godisageek.com. And check out the statement the people who work there put out. This came out, I believe, today. This is kind of incredible if you haven't seen this yet. This is from the whole staff, the editorial team at God is a Geek. We have, each of us, put years of work into the site, attempting to keep entertaining despite the actions of our estranged owner. His input on the site has been zero for several years, but we cannot continue to say nothing. To be absolutely clear, we do not support, share, or condone Calvin Robinson's politics or actions. We've run the site independently of Calvin for several years now in the hopes we would not have to lose the hard work we've poured into it, the access we've worked hard for, and the relationships we've developed. However, it's become increasingly clear we can no longer separate the site from the owner. As a result, the entire editorial team will be stepping down with immediate effect. We'll create a new site, and future content will be published there, bereft of any connection to Calvin Robinson. It'll be hard to start again, hard to walk away from the work we've done here off our own backs, but this is the right thing to do. We cannot apologize on behalf of Calvin and will not. Our severance should stand as proof that we do not support or condone his actions, politics, or beliefs. That is kind of amazing, and that's 5 editors who are all quitting this website because they don't want any connection to their Nazi owner, or at least a guy who pretends he's not one. He's just being funny, like British dry humor. I don't know. Did you also see on CNN that they have a paid panelist whose job is just to defend Trump at all costs? And he was trying to say Elon didn't do a Hitler salute. It was just his way of saying his heart is with everybody. And then one of the other CNN panelists, Catherine Rampell, was like, okay, do it on TV right now. Go ahead and do the thing. And of course, that guy knew he couldn't do it because even he knows that's a Nazi salute. But this is the thing. I encourage all of you, if you think it's hilarious, Go ahead and do the salute and send it to your boss. And let's see what, post it on social media. Go for it. Go for it. If it's so damn funny to you guys, go for it. I will say one thing that bothered me about all the media coverage, the reason that clip went viral is because the website Right Wing Watch and their top researcher, Kyle Mantila, he's the one who watched the videos of all these people speaking. He's the one who clipped Calvin Robinson at the end of that talk. He's the one who posted it online, and his is the video everybody is sharing, including me at the beginning of this segment. And I've seen a lot of articles from the Associated Press and other news outlets about what he did and the fallout from it. And virtually none of them, I think all the big ones, none of them have given credit to Right Wing Watch, which is unfortunate because the work they do is so vital to the discourse that we're having in this country about this stuff. So I think I'll stop there. Don't go full Nazi. I don't know why the right wing's doing it, but again, anyone who's voting Republican, this is what you're supporting. And you should know, I'm just going to assume you're a Nazi until I learn otherwise because all your heroes are doing it. So, anyway. All right. What questions do we have here? I am not a Nazi. I was just making fun of people for being mad at what looked like a Nazi salute by doing the same thing. That is exactly what they sound like, and it sounds just as dumb when they try to excuse themselves. So, yes, agreed. Elon Musk is too powerful. He can get away with it. His other average Joes are getting in trouble for even doing the salute. It's so funny to watch people get in trouble. I think I've seen like 2 stories of random people getting fired for posting that stuff on social media. And it's like, yeah, what did you think was going to happen? You think it's okay? Go ahead. You think slurs are hilarious to say? Go say them at work. Go put it on social media. You see how that goes for you. A mixture of delusionality, gaslighting, and damage control is what's going on. We need to both condemn and exploit what I think was an unscripted misstep the rest would not have endorsed in advance. To that point, it is so frustrating right now that the Democratic Party is so bad at capitalizing on all of this. Why isn't the Musk story the only thing Democrats are talking about? Why isn't the tragic plane crash that happened on Wednesday night the only thing Democrats are talking about by blaming it on the Trump administration for firing people who work at the FAA? Like, if you had a good, strong opposition party, they would know how to use this stuff and just take over media and just talk about how awful Trump is and has been, and all of his followers and all the people he's appointing. We need someone who has the good sense in the Democratic Party who can do that. Like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Maxwell Frost, they do a wonderful job of it, but they're not leaders in the party. If the party can't get their shit together and make a bigger deal out of this, then what the hell are we even doing at this point? What else we got here? You make me feel sane. Thank you, friendly atheist. I appreciate that, Kathleen. Honestly, talking about this stuff helps me process it too. So thank you for listening. Hema needs to read this so we in chat can tell him how much we all missed you last week, Den. It is very true. I was reading the comments last week because Den wasn't here, and that is what everyone was saying because I'm not fast at it. So, yes, I agree. Thank you so much, Den. Anything else here? Can I email you a letter to parents from Oklahoma Superintendent Troy Walters? The answer is yes. You can always email me, and my email address is in the description to this YouTube channel. I always appreciate story tips or anything like that. So, yes, send it over, and we'll talk about that. Ryan Walters will come up later in this live stream. Anything else? All right, let me pull up the next thing here and close a few tabs. And let me pull up this story. Okay. This is a disturbing story, at least until the end of it. And I know I've talked about this before. I think the last time I talked about this may have been 6 or 7 months ago, and maybe some of you were not watching at that time. So I'm going to go over a lot of this again. But basically, Let me show you a picture here of a family from Australia. These are the Strews, and that is Carrie Strews on the left, the mother. That is Jason Strews on the right. He's the father, and they are holding their. He is holding his daughter Elizabeth in the front. And the reason we're talking about the Strews is because a few years ago, Elizabeth, the girl in that picture, she was 8 years old in 2022, and she was found dead in their home in Queensland, Australia. Tragic. It turns out she had type 1 diabetes and she needed daily insulin shots. But the people who were close to her, including her two parents, they just refused to give her insulin shots. What did they do instead? They just prayed for her to get better. That's it. They were like, God is in control. So God will fix the whatever our daughter needs. It never crossed their mind, apparently, that you could just make up a rationale here. You could just say, well, God invented insulin shots, so we can give her insulin. Never crossed their mind. So apparently, for 6 days, those two parents and members of their Christian sect, I would call it a cult, they chose faith healing over actual medicine, believing that's what God wanted, and the girl died as a result. What was even more damning about this is it's not the first time this had happened. Apparently, in 2019, 3 years before she died, her parents also withheld insulin from her. And what happened to the girl at that time? She fell into a coma and was taken to a hospital. This is a news story about it, but look at this. A nurse has told the court that when Jason, the dad, took Elizabeth to this hospital, she was unresponsive and extremely pale, and the nurse believed she had passed away. She weighed 13 kilograms. That's like under 30 pounds. It was a miracle she survived, spending 1 month in the hospital, diagnosed then as a diabetic who needed daily injections. So, years prior to her dying, they already knew this was a problem. They took her to the hospital. She managed to survive. And as a result of that whole ordeal, the parents actually did get punished for that one. This is Jason Strews was sentenced to 6 months in prison, while Carrie Strews was sentenced to 18 months imprisonment. And what happened is Jason never ended up going to jail. He was already like time served. You don't have to go. And Carrie ended up only going to jail for like 5 months. And as soon as Carrie got back home, it's now 2020 or it's 2021 or something. Within just a matter of weeks, Elizabeth Strews died. Like 23 days after her mother returned home, this girl was dead. That's how these people have no understanding of how anything works. So the reason I bring this up, and the reason I brought it up a while back, is that last summer marked the beginning of a trial in Australia for the 14 people who were accused of playing a role in her death. And what happened is they belong to a religious sect or cult known as the Saints, and the Saints have 23 members in it. 14 of those members are adults, the rest are children, and all 14 adults were put on trial and charged with manslaughter. Two of them were not charged with manslaughter. Two of them, the dad, Jason, and the group's alleged leader, Brendan Stevens, they were charged with murder. And the difference between those two charges and the charges on everyone else is that the prosecutors said, we believe not only did these two guys withhold the insulin shots, we think they did that knowing how dangerous it would be. So they knew that this daughter would die. If they did it anyway. That's why they were charged with murder. Everyone else charged with manslaughter. This is actually what one of the prosecutors said at the time. Crown Prosecutor Carolyn Marcos said it was alleged the group adhered to a belief that God heals and that medication is to be rejected unless it's in the nature of no more than first aid, such as applying a Band-Aid. Band-Aids are fine. Actual medicine, not okay to these people. I know someone is asking this right now. They're all related, right? Actually, of those 23 people who are part of this community, 23 people actually we're talking about 3 families that made up those 23 people. So a lot of them are related. They're not all related to each other. So this trial went on for a while. And I'm happy to say there's a verdict this week. Finally, this is why I wanted to talk about this. I want you to see this. Not only is this the ruling, it's look at the top there. It's 469 pages. And it's in Australia. So it's what are the parties? It's the king versus all of those 14 people. Interestingly enough, regarding this trial, not a single one of the 14 suspects had a lawyer. Not a single one of them went to the stand to offer up evidence in their defense. And there was also no jury. This was literally the state making a case against all 14 of these people in front of a judge. And this all came down to the judge's decision. And so, what did the judge say about all this? He said 2 things. First, with those 2 guys convicted of murder, this judge said, I don't feel like I can go with the murder accusation. Here's what he said about that. I want to make sure I'm reading the right thing here. Here we go. I want to find where's the thing I am looking for. I apologize. It disappeared. Here we go. He said, I'm not going to say these 2 guys are guilty of murder. And speaking of one of them, this is what he said. Look at number 761. On the evidence before me, there remained a reasonable possibility that in the cloistered atmosphere of the church, which enveloped Mr. Strews, and which only intensified once she made the decision to cease the administration of insulin, he was so consumed by a particular belief, promoted without pause by all its members, that he never came to the full realization Elizabeth would probably die, believing instead God would not allow that to happen. To put that another way, the judge said, look, murder would assume these guys knew she was going to die. I think there's a little doubt. I think these guys were so brainwashed, they really did think God was going to make her better. So I can't convict them of murder. That is the bad news. The good news, as far as any good news in this goes, is that all 14 of those people were found guilty of manslaughter. All of them. So they will be sentenced in February. I don't know how long of a prison sentence they face, but all 14 of them are guilty. And that means they're going to get some sort of punishment. Look at what the judge also said about Elizabeth's mother, Carrie. This is also fascinating. This is number 33 here. In the case against Carrie Strews, as with her husband, the complete abdication on her part of the legal duty she owed to her daughter constituted such an egregious departure from the standard of care a reasonable member of the community would observe in the same circumstances as to amount to a crime against the state that is deserving of punishment. Again, like her husband, when her conduct was viewed objectively, it must be seen as having involved grave moral guilt and disregard for human life. Which, yes, absolutely. It's kind of refreshing to see a judge saying, I don't care what your religious beliefs were, any normal, rational person would have known what you were doing was wrong. And I'm going to punish you for it. You can't claim religion as an excuse for murdering someone. So there is that. I will say, I don't know that those 2 men deserve to be let off with the murder charges, but at least I think they were complicit, but at least they were found guilty of manslaughter. One of the things that may come to your mind when you're looking at the story is that several years ago, there was actually a church like this in Oregon. It was called the Followers of Christ Church, and their members, also tight-knit insular community, their members also killed several of their own children by not taking them to the hospital when there was something clearly wrong. It was so egregious that the Oregon legislature actually removed faith healing as an exemption to homicide, which that means faith healing was an exemption to homicide until these people took it too far. There is one other thing to point out here, which is one of the silver linings to this whole case has been Jade Strews, who is Elizabeth's oldest sister. Apparently, she left this family's cult when she was 16 years old. She came out as a lesbian. She tried to take custody of the rest of her siblings. I actually don't know how that worked out for her. But after this verdict was announced this week, this is what Jade said. She said, while it was a good outcome, the system failed to protect Elizabeth in the first place. We're only here today because more wasn't done sooner to protect her or remove her from an incredibly unsafe situation in her own home. So, yes, it's a good outcome, but also, hey, government, why didn't you protect these kids in the first place? When she was taken to the hospital the first time 3 years ago, and because she wasn't given insulin, how come the custody wasn't taken away from the parents then? Which is a very fair point and also very disturbing. Um, you wish, what would have happened if Elizabeth was put in that sister's custody instead of under the protection of the adults who decided prayer trumped medicine? Then she would still be with us today. So, disturbing stuff. Happy-ish outcome because there's no winners in this, but I'm glad the 14 people were found guilty of something. I will pause there. What questions do we have? 15 kilograms. Was it 19? Whatever it was, but it was like, yeah, 29 pounds when she was admitted to the hospital. Plus, this is Australia where they have proper public health care. Money wasn't an issue here. No kidding. I'm glad she got the care she needed because, yeah, if it cost money for her to get it, who knows what her parents would have done at that point. Let me be very unequivocal. Children cannot consent to care, nor can they decline care. It is child abuse not to provide necessary medical care to a minor. I agree. Not doing so is child abuse. Fully agree with you there. The level of culpability in this case was such that I think the judge was in error. It was not remotely reasonable for these people to expect that God would save the child. I don't know if I agree with that. I think it's possible to be so brainwashed and so in a bubble that and when you're told your entire life God will provide if you have enough faith, I do know there are people who are crazy enough to actually believe that. So I don't know that it's unreasonable to think something would happen. What I don't get is why they don't do what other Christians do all the time, which is pray for whatever outcome you want, but then do whatever you need to do to get that outcome and then give God credit for it. Like other Christians do that all the time. I don't know why these people were like, well, we can't give her medicine. That's cheating. Let's just have faith in God and God will provide. When did this happen? This happened in 2022 is when Elizabeth died, January of 2022. And it's been 3 years and now there's finally those guilty verdicts. 2019 is when she was taken to the hospital the first time. It's a difficult balance act, says Robin, because religion is given so many government protections, unfortunately. Yeah, I'm very curious. I don't know enough about Australian law. I wonder how much deference they give religion there, because they certainly give it in the United States. But I'm glad they seem to just set aside the whole, it's your religion, so you can do whatever you want. Oh, thanks for that donation. But my religious freedoms, I know, didn't work. Didn't work for that family, those families. So thank goodness. Olivia says, like they say, God helps those who help themselves. Yeah, what's that famous story? Like a guy is in a flood, he's sitting on his roof waiting to be saved, and a boat comes by and says, I'm here to rescue you. And the dude on the roof is like, no, don't worry, you can go. I trust God. God will provide. Second boat comes, guy says the same thing. Third boat comes, guy says the same thing. Finally, the flood gets really bad. The guy drowns. Guy goes to heaven and he says, God, I had faith in you. Why didn't you provide? And God says, dude, I sent you 3 boats. What the hell? Go on them. Something like that. I'm butchering the joke, obviously. But yes, you can just say the insulin is what God wanted. God created the insulin. Give it to the kid. You could totally do that. I don't know why these people like believe in God and trust in God for everything that they're actually doing. And then when it comes to something actually important, they're like, no, don't need it. All right. Go sign up for the newsletter. I'm going to jump to a different story as soon as I get rid of these tabs. Let me take a quick sip here. Okay. This is an interesting bill that is from Montana. Seven Democratic lawmakers in Montana just filed a bill that would require clergy members, like Catholic priests, to report abuse to law enforcement if they happen to learn about it through the act of confession. And actually, I have two stories about this. This is the first one. But if you don't know what I'm talking about here, this is really important to know. As it stands, let's say you're Catholic, you go to a Catholic church, you decide, I need to confess my sins. That is a sacrament. That is something very important in my religious faith. So I will go into the booth, confess to the priest whatever sinful things I have done, and the priest will hopefully forgive me and tell me how many Hail Marys to say to make things right again. And hopefully the thinking goes, I will stop doing those sinful things. And the thing is, when you tell a priest your sins, the priest is supposed to keep that information secret. That's kind of the point. You're confessing to somebody to absolve you of the guilt, but you can rest assured no one's going to tell anyone what your secret is. Now, compare that to doctors, social workers, or public school teachers who often get told secrets by the people they're in contact with. The difference is those professions are mandated reporters. They are required by law to file a report or tell an authority figure if they learn about or suspect that a child is being abused. So that's the difference. Some professions, the people are mandated reporters. Priests are not. So why won't religious leaders agree to report suspected abusers? Well, in the Catholic Church, Vatican officials have always said the seal of confession is sacrosanct. Anything said in the confessional booth has to be kept a secret no matter what. Otherwise, you're breaking the mirage, the illusion of religion. Like, if there's any potential that a priest might tell your secret or that certain confessions could be used as evidence against you, then maybe people won't want to confess their sins, and then maybe the church will go out of business. That's kind of the logic that they have. So in Montana, at least this week, 7 Democrats filed a bill, and they're led by someone named State Senator Mary Ann Dunwell. They filed a bill, it's Senate Bill 139, that would basically get rid of the exemption to priests. This is the whole bill. I know it's hard to read. There's a lot going on here, but look at what it says. Individuals who receive information shall maintain the confidentiality of the information. But then there is a section here about everyone is required to make a report. Or here's what it says: you may not refuse to make a report. Right above my head. You may not refuse to make a report. And then look at letter B here. A member of the clergy or a priest is not required to make a report. That's the exemption. And what this bill would do is it just crosses all of that out. Basically saying everyone who learns about abuse would be required to report it. Priests are not special. You don't get an exemption. You have to play by the same rules that everyone else plays by. That's all this bill does, right? According to that bill, it says if any mandated reporters know or have reasonable cause to suspect that a child is abused or neglected by anyone, they shall report the matter. Totally smart thing to do. Now, here's one problem with this bill. It would be almost impossible to enforce because it's not like there are hidden microphones inside a confessional booth. How would you actually know that some abuser, some predator, decided, oh my God, I'm feeling so guilty about what I did to that child. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to go to a confessional booth and just pretend like it's therapy. And I'm going to spill my guts to a priest, and the priest is going to help me atone for my sins. And then I'll get away with it and I can keep doing it. How are you going to prove that that's actually what's going on? It'd be really, really hard to do, right? But in theory, according to this bill, if there was proof that someone did that and a priest did not tell anyone about that information, they would be charged with a misdemeanor, and that could result in a multi-year prison sentence in Montana. So, like, if you care about children, this is a straightforward common sense bill. There is no reason a priest should be allowed to keep his knowledge of child abuse secret because of his religious beliefs. Obviously, though, as I'm sure you all know by now, the Catholic Church doesn't actually give a damn about children. Or at least the sacrament of confession is more important to them than the safety of kids. And I know this because this has come up in discussion before. A couple years ago in Delaware, they tried passing a law just like this. And do you know what one Catholic priest said? Bishop William Koenig, who oversees the Catholic Diocese of Wilmington, told NBC 10 his diocese works hard in every way to protect children. But he also said the proposed bill was non-negotiable, however. For a priest to break the seal of confession, he would be excommunicated, Bishop Koenig said. That could only be lifted by the Pope. He says that like we're all supposed to think, oh, yeah, I mean, of course that would be horrible to get excommunicated. I guess we should let the child predators just roam free then. Like, what world do you live in where getting excommunicated is something worse than letting a child keep getting molested? I don't know. If you would rather protect priests than the victims, then maybe your organization is not, as that bishop said, working hard in every way to protect children. Here's another thing that happened this week. You know, the Catholic League, that right-wing Catholic group that just only puts out press releases when they want to whine about how Christians are being persecuted. This is what William Donahue wrote to Montana lawmakers. Look at the second paragraph here. It is unwarranted, this bill, because there's no breaking news on priests abusing this exemption. So what broke? There's not a scintilla of evidence that child abusers are confessing their sins to Catholic priests. Indeed, it strains credulity to argue that a person who is so depraved as to molest a child is likely to tell a priest about his behavior. If any lawmaker has evidence this is now a serious problem, we would like to see it. I ask this because the Catholic priest has dealt with this alleged problem before in several states, and not one lawmaker has ever been able to provide such evidence. This explains why all of these efforts ultimately fail. Show me some proof someone has confessed to child predation. Actually, this is the same group that when we started hearing stories about how priests were molesting kids and all those grand jury reports came out, the Catholic League put out statements saying the problem here is not the priesthood. It's not the rules of the Catholic Church. The problem is that some of these priests are gay. That's seriously what that group said. And now they're like, there's no evidence anyone's confessing these types of sins. Okay, here's a headline from 2020 in Australia. Catholic priest confessed 1,500 times to abusing children, and a victim says mandatory reporting could have saved him. There, I did it. I win. There's your headline that you think doesn't exist. So just Catholic League, not serious group of people. But here's the thing. Even there's a couple ways this could go. If we're talking about a very limited number of people, abusers, who admit their crimes, maybe out of guilt through confession, why should they be let off the hook? Why do we think they should just be allowed to keep doing whatever it is they're doing? What about children who tell a priest that their father is abusing them or their uncle is abusing them? If a kid says that, because for whatever reason they think it's their fault, and so they need to confess it, why would we want to keep that a secret? Why should priests be allowed to keep any of these admissions secret? And if it never happens, which is what Donahue is saying, then why would this bill even be a problem for you? This bill wouldn't not affect the church at all if it never happens. It doesn't single out Catholics. It just says all adults in like positions of authority who may learn about abuse should be mandated reporters. Like, no one is forcing priests to reveal other types of confessions, just ones involving the abuse of children. It just seems like the Catholic Church and the Catholic League just have a secrecy fetish. and they don't want anyone to know if kids are getting abused. I will say, not all priests are like this. There was actually in Delaware, when that bill was being considered a couple years ago, one priest actually said some really interesting things that I want to show you here. James Connell, who was a retired bishop, this is what he wrote in an essay for a local Delaware paper. Let me see if I could pull this up here. Unquestionably, secrets have a proper place in our lives. But if secrets contribute to the abuse or neglect of a minor, that form of secrecy is immoral and detrimental to the common good of the society. And then, where? Look at this. And yet, where's that part that I want? Oh, here we go. As a result, governments should intervene such that, while perhaps frustrating the free exercise of religion for some people, the greater good of protecting children from abuse or neglect would be enhanced for the common good of all people. Our society should protect children, rather than protecting culprits. Like, that dude was great, and he's worked on this issue for a long time. You know what happened to him after he published that essay? The Archbishop of Milwaukee said that guy's no longer allowed to hear confessions. Like, he was punished for writing that essay. This is another one, another thing that's interesting. A Republican in Montana is already trying to whip votes against this bill. Lucas Schubert, Montana Republican, says anti-Catholic bill is going through the Montana State Senate that would force priests to break the confessional seal and dissuade people from seeking forgiveness from God. It's like, look at how he avoids telling anyone what that bill is about. The bill says, hey, we want to stop child abuse. And this guy is like, you guys, people won't confess or seek forgiveness from God. So just, don't read the bill. Just tell your representatives to vote against it. It's anti-Catholic. No, it's anti-abuse. And if you're the one equating abuse and Catholicism, that's on you. But this is how Republicans are lying to make sure this bill doesn't get passed. One more thing to show you here. The Associated Press put out this chart not that long ago, but they said that since 1987, more than 130 bills have been proposed at the state level to address sex abuse crisis. And not one of those 130 laws has been able to pass a bill that covers up that confession loophole. Anywhere they've said priests have to be mandated reporters, there's always an exception in the bill that says priests have to talk about it if they learn about abuse, unless you hear about it through confession, in which case you can keep the secret. So I don't know what's going to happen to this Montana bill. It is Montana. Democrats are vastly outnumbered, but it is the right thing to do. And kudos to those Democrats for proposing this bill and sponsoring this bill. And I hope they keep fighting for it. I'm going to stop there for a bit. What questions do we have? Can I have a link to this piece? Yes, I'm going to send it to Den. And when you are watching this on YouTube later, you can also see it in the show notes as well. There are 7 Democrats in Montana. Buddy, I didn't know there were 7 people in Montana, so I'm as surprised as you are. Unfortunately, those 7 Democrats are, again, very outnumbered in the legislature. So this is kind of performative, but there's a difference. Like when Republicans are being performative, it's always like racist or Nazi stuff. And when Democrats are being performative because they know they won't get a bill passed, it's this is how we would like to help people. And then Republicans are like, that's adorable. Go away. They work hard to protect children from everything except predators. Very true. Though, do they really work hard to protect children from anything? I am not sure about that. I feel like your kids are in more danger if they step inside a Catholic church. That's the way it should be. All crimes should be reported, right? It shouldn't be that complicated. If you're a teacher, like I'm a coach of stuff at a public school. If a kid tells me something is happening that is illegal because that kid trusts me, my job, legally speaking, is to break that trust and tell their counselor or tell someone in law enforcement because that's my duty to those kids. It's to make sure they're safe. Apparently, Catholic Church feels different. The Roman Catholic leadership has been unaccountable for far too long. How many crimes against humanity does it take to get the Vatican shut down? That is the weirdest how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop question I've ever heard, because the answer is all of them. We never know because no one can find out the answer. The answer is we're not there yet. They just are going to keep committing more crimes, and the Vatican's going to let them do it. God, I can already see Catholics treating a priest who chose prison over breaking a sacrament as a martyr. No kidding. Imagine if a priest said, I will not release what happened at confession. I'm going to prison. What that means is there's a child who's getting abused. That's all that means if this dude's going to jail, hypothetically. So, yeah, I don't know why they're trying to fight this particular battle. What if someone confesses to murder or several murders? This is an interesting point Carla brings up, because if someone confesses to murder, that's actually not part of the mandated reporting, because it's not about crime, it's about child abuse. So in theory, if someone confessed to murder, I don't think anyone's worried about that one. I don't think anyone's saying the priest has to report that. I would like to see a bigger law that says if you are aware of a crime taking place, you have to report that if it involves like the death of someone else or the abuse of someone else. But none of those bills, as far as I can tell, have been proposed. Off topic, but I just wanted to let Hemant know that he chose the correct flavor of Gatorade. I don't know what flavor this is. I just know it's red. So that's what I go with. Red or light blue. Those are the only acceptable flavors. If it's clear, stay away. That's cherry. No one likes that. All right. I'm going to get to the next story here. This one comes with video. Okay. So I just did a story about confession booths and a bill trying to get priests to have to report if they learn about child abuse through the act of confession. Well, that story was in Montana. A similar thing is happening in Washington state. And I'm showing you the relevant part of this bill in Washington state. And this is, I'll remove myself here so you could see this. The only interesting thing happening here is it talks about how, quote, coaches, anyone who is in contact with children, anyone in supervisory authority has to report abuse. If a child has suffered abuse or neglect, or you have reasonable cause to believe that, you got to report it to an authority figure. And then look at the end of this current law right now. The current law, not the underlined part, the current law says no one shall be required to report under this section when he or she obtains the information solely as a result of a privileged communication. So right now, the law says if you learn about this through something that's already a secret, I'm just spitballing here. Maybe you're a lawyer and you learn about this because your client told you something in confidence. Maybe that would be an exemption to the law. But it says if you learned about it through things that are already protected, you don't have to report it. What this new bill in Washington would do is say, guess what? That rule does not apply to members of the clergy. So this is the way they are saying, if a priest learns about abuse through the act of confession, you don't get to do this loophole. You don't get an exemption. You are a mandated reporter. You have to tell an authority figure about this. So it's slightly different than the version we just saw in Montana, but it has the same end result. This is Senate Bill 5375, and basically all it would do is add members of the clergy to the list of mandated reporters, and that would be a good thing. And what's interesting about what's happening in Washington state is that this is the third time in a couple of years they've tried to pass this bill. The problem is every time they try to pass the bill, the Catholic Church complains about it. Republicans sometimes complain about it. And they have to say, okay, you want to protect kids, but you got to include a loophole that protects priests during the act of confession. Like that exemption has to be in every version of this bill. And so what's different this time around is that State Senator Noelle Frame, she said the last time she tried to file this bill, she had to include that compromise. She had to include the confession compromise. But after she did it the last time, the state's attorney general announced that 3 separate dioceses in the state were being investigated for sex abuse by clergy members. And so many people were so mad about this, including politicians, that they said, why are we making an exemption for priests who learn about abuse through the act of confession? Get rid of the loophole. And it's not just Democrats who did that. People from both parties were so upset about the abuse that they said, screw the compromise, no compromise. But after they got rid of it, people started complaining that there was no exemption, and the bill just ended up sitting there and going nowhere, unfortunately. They ran out of time to pass it. So now Noel Frame is attempting to pass this mandated reporter bill again. And the big thing about it is there is no compromise in this bill. There is no, if you learn about it in confession, it's okay. Nope. As you saw, I showed it to you. Clergy members are not exempt anymore. That's what her bill does. And I want to show you a section of the testimony she gave during the committee hearing because I found it really touching why this is so important to her. So let me play this for you.
I will say that the bill fell apart last year after the revelation that the Catholic, 3 separate archdioceses of the Catholic Church were being investigated. Which was not able to be corroborated until after legislative session last year, but that became public. And quite frankly, it made it hard for me at a personal level to stomach any argument about religious freedom being more important than preventing the abuse, including the sexual abuse of children. Because everybody that's been following this bill knows that this one is personal for me. As a survivor of sexual abuse myself, and abuse that only stopped when I told a mandated reporter, which was a teacher. So I have tried really hard over the last couple of years to find a balance and to strike a careful compromise. And I'm just here to say, for those who I've tried to work with, I'm really sorry that I don't feel like I can make a compromise for you anymore. And I stand by the bill with no exemption.
When was the last time you saw that kind of courage from a lawmaker? I don't feel like I can make a compromise for you anymore. Like, yes, you can't compromise with people who would eagerly throw abuse victims under the bus if their mythology demanded it. And furthermore, there is no way to exempt confession from mandated reporting when confession itself is the problem here, because it gives sexual predators a way to shed some of their guilt without interfering with whatever it is they're doing to kids. They don't deserve that kind of safe space to spill their guts without penalty. So at this committee hearing where they were just discussing the bill, there were a lot of people testifying. They could go either way. They could testify for it or against it. Most of the testimony was for passing this bill because, yeah, priests should have to report this stuff. One person, Sharon Hewling with the Clergy Accountability Coalition, she pointed out the irony of how the church will excommunicate a good priest if he reports child sexual abuse that he learned about in confession. But if there's a bad priest who commits that crime, that priest doesn't get excommunicated. And isn't that weird? She also reiterated in her testimony that, listen, confession's going to be protected for everybody else. The only people who have to worry about the privacy of their confession are people going after kids. So screw them. Now, you might be wondering, who the hell would testify against this bill? Who is saying, yeah, kids are getting abused, but you know what we should do about that? Nothing. It's a member of the Catholic Church. Let me show you a video. This is Bishop Frank Schuster of the Archdiocese of Seattle. And he says early in his remarks, of course child abuse is bad. Of course the Catholic Church wants to protect the kids. But you guys, have you ever heard of someone named Jesus? This is basically what his argument boils down to. Let me play his clip.
Every priest is trained to be a mandatory reporter. Every employee and volunteer are trained to be mandatory reporters. Except the rite of penance. Why this one exception? The rite of penance, as the term rite indicates, is a liturgy. It's an act of worship. It's prayer. for us. The seal of confession is essential to the rite because the penitent has the right to confess their sins without worrying their sins will become public. The penalty for breaking that seal is excommunication. Something even as a bishop, I can't, have any power over. And even the Pope would say he doesn't have power because this is a sacrament that comes from Christ. You see, this is coming from the Lord. This sacrament. And so it's impossible for a priest to comply this bill in this one instance. However, preserving the seal of confession does not prevent a priest from promoting justice and safety. In fact, confession is an opportunity to tell offenders to turn themselves in as a matter of restitution, talking to young people who are experiencing abuse to help identify a safe adult who is a mandatory reporter. So to be able to direct in that direction. We believe in the spirit of the bill. We believe in the spirit of the bill and be honored to be partners in rewording it so it does not violate our constitutional freedom of religion.
He believes in the spirit of the bill, just not the thing that's actually going to make it worthwhile. Did you hear the crazy thing he said? Like, if you're a priest and you're in the confession booth, you can totally stop the abuse, not by being a mandated reporter. You can just tell offenders to turn themselves in. Yeah, it's that easy. I'm sure that's what everything he said there just deserves to be ridiculed and condemned. Because, as I said last time, in no rational world is getting excommunicated more damning than letting a child continue to suffer abuse. And if you would rather protect priests than kids, your organization should just admit we don't give a damn about children. All right? That's like telling offenders to turn themselves in. That's like Pete Hegseth saying, you guys, if you make me Secretary of Defense, I promise I'll stop binge drinking in the mornings. Like, no one should believe you. We know who you are. It's not suddenly going to fix itself. I want to show you one more clip. This one's a good one. This is from my friend and someone who occasionally watches this live stream as well, Christiana de Leon. She is a board member of the Association of Secular Elected Officials, and she spoke out in favor of this bill as well. And I'm going to let her speak for herself. She only had like 2 minutes at the very end of the session, but she managed to squeeze a lot of good stuff in. So I really appreciated it. I hope you do too. Let me show you this.
This is not an anti-religion bill. This is about solidarity with survivors, including those who are still practicing their faiths and want to do so in a safe way, and that they can trust that the people who are running their services will be able to say that these people are going to be supporting my child or any other vulnerable person when they are in a position where they really need that help. What I've heard today was a lot of things about rights, R-I-T-E-S, and not rights as in human rights or the First Amendment rights of the people who are in these churches who deserve to be kept safe. I will want to remind everybody that we did have a bill that was really specially catered for the Catholic lobby group last year, to Senator Frame's point. And thank you to the senators in this room for sponsoring this bill. I am for it. We had a very narrowly tailored version that was essentially gerrymandered to provide religious privilege to one entity. It was the survivors of other religious entities and survivors from within the Catholic Church that said this did not go far enough. Washington State truly can be a leader in saying that no matter where abuse happens, you can be protected. I'll just close that I used to be a former mandated reporter, and one of the very first things that we're always taught is that it's important to report abuse. What I heard just recently was that somehow you shouldn't be reporting abuse because it might, scare away a victim. And that is one of the very perennial, evergreen things that anybody who's ever been taught mandated reporter knows, is that they have to be able to report and have that conversation with the impacted person. So thank you for your time. Please pass the bill.
Love it. And I hope all of you who have these things going on in your state, I hope you will sign up to deliver those comments, because they're always looking for people testifying for or against a bill. And Christiana's right. It's long past time the rights of individuals come before the rights of religious leaders. R-I-T-E-S at the second one there. If this bill passes, I just want to share this with you. This is from the Seattle Times. Mandated reporters in the state are required to report suspicions of abuse within 48 hours, and those who are required but fail to do that are guilty of a gross misdemeanor, which can carry a sentence of up to a year in prison and a $5,000 fine. So this is what priests would be they would be eligible for if this law is passed and they don't do their job because they're more worried about being excommunicated. But we'll see if this does anything. 5 other Democrats are co-sponsoring this bill in Washington. And if it were to go into effect, it would go into effect at the end of July. We'll see where it goes. Hasn't worked yet in any state. These types of bills have been offered, but you just need one to get the ball rolling. So that's it there. What questions do we have? Child abusers are known for turning themselves in. Yeah, that's what the Catholic priest suggested, that if a priest just says, you turn yourself in, that's totally what they do. Like, if they were going to do that, why would they be going to see a priest first? Like, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Oh, thank you for that donation, Olivia. Didn't we have a story about a Mormon pastor who was told not to report a father who was abusing his kid? Wouldn't that qualify as an example they complained, saying didn't exist? That is a very good point. In fact, the thing you were talking about, where was that? I want to make sure I actually had that up here. In 2010, the story you're talking about, an Arizona guy named Paul Adams, he confessed to his bishop, his Mormon bishop, that he was sexually abusing his 5-year-old daughter. And the bishop was like, well, that sounds like a problem. I should report that. But in the Mormon church, they have like a toll-free hotline you're supposed to call to figure out what to do in sketchy situations. So he called the helpline and they said, oh, interesting. You know what you should do with that information? Nothing. And then the abuse just continued for years. And the dad's children eventually sued the Mormon church over this for knowing they could, for being able to step in, but not stepping in. And what happened with that case? The case was eventually tossed out by a judge. Why? Because according to Utah's laws, if you reveal something during an act of confession, it's allowed to stay a secret. So to your point, Olivia, yeah, this is one of those examples, to Bill Donahue of the Catholic League in the last story, of here's someone confessing to exactly this sort of thing, and they're pretending like it never happens. The church is ground zero for these kinds of crimes. They are a major part of the problem, and they should be held accountable in kind for their part in it. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm mad that other Catholic leaders aren't taking a bigger step in pushing for this sort of accountability. Like, every time there's police reform, you want cops, you wish more cops were on the front lines saying, yes, I want more accountability for my profession because that makes all of us better, instead of everyone saying, no, this is too much. We want more freedom. And if something bad happens, so be it. Like, it makes no sense at all. It's kind of a catch-22. If the priest doesn't report, people feel safe confessing. If he does report, they will no longer confess. I'll tell you what, if he does report and they no longer confess, I'm not bothered by that, because I don't really think these abusers are getting anything out of the confession. So if you're taking something away from the abuser, fine, because they're going to want to tell somebody. That's why they're going to confession, and I hope they tell someone who can do something about it. I'm really not worried that if the priest is required to report, then the bad guys are suddenly going to follow all the rules and avoid doing the thing that's going to incriminate them. That's why we have laws. And this is the common argument against laws. Like, well, if you have a law saying this is a bad thing, then, I mean, what's that? Like, if you take away, if guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns or something like that. Same type of logic. Like, if you say the priest is going to report you, you seriously think abusers are going to be like, well, I guess I shouldn't do that thing? There are laws saying you can't abuse kids. They abuse kids anyway. So I don't think they really care what the rules are. So I'm not worried about that. Catch-22. All right. I got a couple more stories for you here that are not related to that story. Okay, let me pull this up really quick. Okay. There's an interesting story happening in Madison, Wisconsin, and this involves property taxes, and it's like a statistician, or it's like a CPA's dream or something. But Bear with me because I think this gets to the heart of a religious problem. I'm going to show you a website right here. It's for Pres House, Pres, in the top corner there. And basically, Pres House is basically a student dorm for people who are part of the Presbyterian group at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I don't have any problem with the group or anything, but Pres House is basically a fraternity of sorts, but it's for members of the Presbyterian Student Center Foundation at UW-Madison. There's also one other apartment complex. This is called Lumen House right here, and this is for members of the Catholic organization at UW-Madison. Like, if you're a member of that group, you're eligible to stay in an apartment that is this apartment, and whatever. Frats do this all the time. Other clubs might have student housing for members of their group. Nothing weird about that. Here's where things get weird. In 2009, the state of Wisconsin passed a law about these kinds of, I'm going to call them dorms. They're student apartment complexes, but let's call them dorms. And in 2009, the state lawmakers, mostly Republicans, they basically passed a law saying, let's make housing like that tax exempt. And this is what they passed specifically. Let me show you this law. It says, when it comes to property taxes, we will say you don't have to pay property taxes if three things are true. One, the facility is owned by a nonprofit group. Two, at least 90% of the facility's residents are enrolled at UW-Madison, and you are housing no more than 300 such students. And three, you offer services and outreach programs to the residents or the public. So they said, if you fall into this category, you're providing student housing just for UW-Madison, and you don't have more than 300 people, and 90% of the people who live there are students enrolled at UW-Madison, no property taxes for you. Here's why that's weird. The way that was worded, it only applied to one dorm, to one student housing facility, and it was that Presbyterian house. That's it. So it doesn't mention religion in the law, but it only benefits religion in the law. It was actually worded more broadly that it would have helped a lot of other groups, but one lawmaker narrowed that wording, and he said we needed to do that because, quote, common sense would say it should be tax exempt as a religious-based residence, but the tax code was unclear. So they changed the law specifically to give a religious dorm a tax exemption. So that's part one of this story. Before that statute went into effect, Presbyterian House paid about $160,000 in taxes. After that law went into effect, they paid $0 in taxes. And here's part two. Here's the second problem with this. When you say that one giant apartment complex, student housing, when you say they don't have to pay property taxes, that means other people in the community have to pay higher property taxes to make up for the lost revenue. In fact, the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel at the time, this is in 2011, they actually wrote an article about this. Let me show this to you. Calculations based on the best estimate city assessors have, which come from vague and poorly reported data, show the exemptions are costly, driving up tax bills for average homeowners by nearly 20%. That's close to $800 more for a Milwaukee property taxpayer with a home assessed at $175,000. So because they're giving all these tax breaks to these student dorms that are belonging to the Presbyterian Church group, and other groups as well, get property taxes. I think the same article here noted like 40% of the buildings were tax exempt, but that means the burden is on everybody else to make up for all that lost revenue. That's the problem with all this, right? So guess what happened in 2011? This problem, people complained about property taxes so much, not just to Democrats, but to Republicans as well, that in 2011, the Republican legislature in Wisconsin said, we got to get rid of some of these tax exemptions. and they passed a law to get rid of it. And then Scott Walker was the governor, and he was like, but I want to run for president as a Republican. So he vetoed that bill. So the tax exemption for Prez House remained in place. So then guess what happened in 2013, a couple years later? Now we have even more Republicans in the legislature, and they changed the property tax law again. And this is what it says now. Get this. The same, like, we're going to allow student housing to be tax exempt. You could see 3M. This is under the category of student housing facilities. And they say you can be tax exempt if you're run by a nonprofit, 90% go to UW-Madison, you don't have more than 300 people, you do some outreach or whatever. But look at number 4 that just got added in 2013. The facility has to be in existence and meeting the requirements of all the stuff that's highlighted on July 2nd, 2013, which is like when this law was passed, except if the facility is located in a municipally designated landmark and it's in existence and meets the requirements on September 30th, 2014. That is such a weirdly specific thing to change the law about. But here's what they basically said in English. They said, okay, tax exemptions only apply to everyone who is already getting it, and any building that's a designated landmark that happens to be built a year from now. And guess what? There was only one other building that was a locally designated landmark that happened to be a student housing facility, and it was Lumen House, the one run by the Catholic Church. So they changed the law in 2013 to say, okay, the Prez House can still have a tax exemption because that's the only one that was affected by it. But it turns out there's a Catholic facility that's being built right now, and it's going to open in a couple months. Why don't we change the law to say, okay, they get a tax exemption too, but after them, nobody else at all? Like, this went from being a benefit for one religious group to they changed the law literally to benefit one other religious group. And then they closed the door after that. Do you understand what the problem is here? Like, unbelievable. And the diocese, it was so clear about how the law was changed to benefit them. This is the press release from like the Diocese of Madison. They were thanking Republican lawmakers for changing that law. Their efforts with their colleagues resulted in language that now clearly stipulates that Lumen House, a project of faith-based student housing and outreach ministry sponsored by the Cathedral Parish, will be tax exempt as was envisioned from the beginning. So they took over this historic landmark building in Madison specifically so it could be housing for members of the Catholic Church. And they're like, hey, lawmakers, we need a tax break for this building, but the law says we don't have one. Then the lawmaker said, okay, we'll change the law just to help you out. And then we'll make sure no one else ever gets helped by it ever again. Okay. So the reason I bring all this up is because the Freedom from Religion Foundation is now filing a lawsuit over all of this. Not FFRF specifically, but their co-presidents, Annie Laurie Gaylor and Dan Barker, who are in that picture, they're filing a lawsuit against these laws. And what they say is that change in 2013, that basically created an arbitrary date of existence requirement that grandfathers in any properties that were already getting the tax exemption and excludes all the other ones. And what FFRF is saying is, well, listen, we're based in Madison. What if years from now we want to buy a building and make it student housing for, say, members of the Secular Student Alliance at UW-Madison? What if we want to do that? Which, by the way, is not even weird about, like, FFRF has a lot of money. Theoretically, that is something that they could do and only they could do. But what if they wanted to create a dorm for members of the local atheist group at UW-Madison? Because according to the law, even though they're doing the same thing as the Presbyterian group and the Catholic group, the atheists would not get a tax exemption. They're also suing because they're saying, we don't get this tax break, but our property taxes have gone up because you're giving all these tax breaks to religious groups as well. And they're mad about that. And finally, they say, when these laws were changed, there were no public hearings, no committee reports, no serious debate over whether this change was good or legal. And finally, they say, this isn't even really student housing. It's not cheaper. Those two buildings charge fair market rates for anyone renting their apartments. They're not free to students. They're not cheaper for students. So, like, what part of this is charity? These are just commercial properties. These are real estate companies, these churches, that get away with not paying taxes because they happen to fall under some religious umbrella. And this is what their lawsuit says here. Look at number 44 in their lawsuit here. Based on their combined estimated $33 million in value, omitting the Prez House and Lumen House apartments from the property tax rolls is approximately the equivalent of exempting an entire neighborhood from paying property taxes, which is a big freaking deal. And this is the other thing they point out. There are three plaintiffs, Dan Barker, I mentioned, Annie Laurie Gaylor, and also, I want to make sure I get the name right. Another plaintiff's name is David Peterson, but they also pointed out right here, look at number 61. For over a decade, Miss Gaylor and Mr. Barker and Mr. Peterson have been paying higher property taxes along with all other Madison property taxpayers, in part to make up for the unconstitutional omission of these properties from the city tax rolls. Further, the exemption was created and later amended to unlawfully favor two religious organizations to the exclusion of all other religious or non-religious organizations, including us. FFRF is unable to ever qualify for the exemption if it were to invest in rental properties aimed at renting to UW-Madison students. So that is a fair point. I would be mad about that as well. Another thing they pointed out is, I said their lawsuit said you're losing the equivalent of like an entire neighborhood of property taxes. They actually calculated it. It came out to about $400,000 a year that the city of Madison is not getting because those two houses are not being charged property taxes. Now, in response to all this, Prez House, the Presbyterian one, they said, you guys, we don't have to pay property taxes, but we understand that we are mooching off the city. We use their water, we use their fire department if we ever needed it, etc. So we voluntarily give $15,000 a year to the city. It's something called payment in lieu of taxes, pilot. And they say we give $15,000 in pilot fees. A lot of nonprofits do something like that. But if you're paying $15,000, but getting away with not paying your share of $400,000, that's not a gift to the city. You're still robbing the city just a little less. So I don't know why that's a defense of what they are doing here. I don't know if the lawsuit will be successful. I know that everyone involved in making these tax exemptions a reality made it very clear they were changing the rules to benefit these two religious apartment complexes. But the statutes themselves don't mention religion, so I don't know. I don't know that they need to, because the winks come through loud and clear. So we'll see. Look, the legislature could easily have said all properties designed for college students that provide certain services could be tax exempt, but they didn't do that. They targeted those laws to specifically benefit those religious groups. FFRF is just trying to correct these mistakes, because they actually said, we tried to go through all the proper channels to get this fixed, and all the people responded to us saying, sorry, you're asking the wrong people. I have no control. I have to follow the law. You should ask these people. Then FFRF would write a letter to another agency, and that agency would say, well, why are you asking us? We have nothing to do with it. Go ask the first group. And it's just a big circle jerk or something. FFRF also said, we are suing the city of Madison and those two apartment complexes. We are not suing the state government. We're suing Madison because the city is actually the one providing the exemption. So I think I'll leave it there. Interesting case. I'll be curious to see how that one plays out. Gotta love those tailored laws that benefit a very specific religious institution. Absolutely. And it's always interesting because the people writing those laws try to pretend this is totally not what they're doing, even though we all know exactly what they're doing. The law is explicit to benefit a religious organization. I'd say the lawsuit should be pretty cut and dried. I would like to think that, but the courts are not exactly friendly to atheist litigants. Even harder for renters. Property tax goes up, rent goes up as well. I think you're right about that. I don't know the numbers for the rentals, but yeah, the property taxes in Madison went up because they're not getting that money from all the people who are there. There was a city in Texas. There was an article about this in the New York Times. It might have been 15, 20 years ago, but there was a city in Texas that there would be people coming to this town saying they want to build a church. And the city officials were like, well, of course you can build a church in our community. Take this land. You can buy it for whatever it costs. You can have a church. The problem is because it's a church, they are not paying property taxes. And the city had so many churches, they had no money to actually run the city and they didn't know what to do. And that's why all the churches were coming there because they knew they could build their church. But the city had no income coming in because there was no room for business because every block just had a gazillion churches. Like, you got to set a limit somewhere. All right. I got one more story for you. Let me pull this up. Okay. I don't know if this is going to be a short story, but this happened late last week, and I didn't get a chance to talk about it during the live stream. So I just want to share this with you now. Last week, the U.S. Supreme Court, last Friday, they issued their list of what cases they're going to take up. And it's a really short list. These are the cases they're going to take. They just say certiorari granted. Don't care about that first case, but look at this. This says we are going to hear this case, total of 1 hour for oral argument. This case that they are taking up is really disturbing because the Supreme Court does not need to hear this case. And the fact that they are taking it suggests they really want to do something about this, and that's disturbing. And this is the thing I wanted to talk about. Why is it so disturbing the Supreme Court has taken up this case? Because in a few months, you're going to hear a lot about this case. The case itself involves something called the Saint Isidore of Seville Catholic Virtual School. And I've made videos about this a couple of times already, so I'll try to keep this short. But basically, this is a Catholic school, online only, but it would be a Catholic school that wanted to function as a charter school. Not a private religious school, but a charter school. What does that mean? They're independently run and they're publicly funded. And the headlines you would have seen about this are Oklahoma wants to have the nation's first ever publicly funded charter school. And that's what was so disturbing about it. And what does it mean? That they're a religious school, but they're also publicly funded. Well, you would think if they're publicly funded, there have to be strings attached. They got to play by the rules. But no, because they were a religious school, teachers were not required to be certified. They do not have to accept openly LGBTQ teachers. They could explicitly promote Catholicism during school hours. In theory, if a student became pregnant, they could expel that student. If a student said they were trans, they could be expelled just for existing. So this was not a charter school that just happened to be Catholic. This was a Catholic school that wanted taxpayer funding, so they just called themselves a charter school. Like, everyone who worked at that charter school board knew that. The majority knew that, and they're like, we're totally not letting you become a charter school. But then Republicans in the state basically strong-armed them. They basically pushed one of their own onto that board, got the majority, and they approved that charter school. And what was interesting is after they said this could become the first charter school, the attorney general of the state said, who is a Republican, his name is Gentner Drummond. He's the attorney general of Oklahoma, and he's running, I think, to become the next Republican governor of Oklahoma. He actually said, he actually supports separation of church and state, weirdly enough. So he sued over this school opening because it was supposed to open last fall. So over the summer, he filed the lawsuit and said, we cannot let this happen. We cannot have a publicly funded charter school that's actually a Catholic school. And this went all the way up to the Oklahoma Supreme Court. And the Oklahoma Supreme Court voted 7-1 to shut down this school. They said you cannot open as a charter school. It's clearly unconstitutional. Oklahoma's Constitution says public funds cannot promote religion. The U.S. Constitution says public funds cannot promote religion. So you can't have this publicly funded Catholic school. So that was good news that the Oklahoma Supreme Court said this. Unfortunately, that decision was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And as I already showed you, the U.S. Supreme Court decided to take up this case. And this is what they said. This is according to SCOTUS blog. The school and the charter school board came to the Supreme Court in October asking the justices to weigh in. The schools contended that the state Supreme Court's ruling unconstitutionally punished the free exercise of religion by disqualifying the religious from government aid. That's not true. They didn't say, oh, Catholics aren't allowed to get this money. What's more, the school argued, the state Supreme Court circumvented the U.S. Supreme Court's cases establishing a right to the free exercise of religion by transmuting St. Isidore into an arm of the government. Yeah, that's how public schools work, by the way. It reasoned that excluding St. Isidore on religious grounds raised no free exercise problem because St. Isidore's contract would turn the school into a surrogate of the state, noting that Oklahoma's legislature had labeled the charter schools public. I don't really get what that last part means. What I don't get is, listen, if you want public funding and you want to be a charter school, which is a public school, you got to play by the rules. And if the state Supreme Court says you're clearly trying to push Catholicism and Catholic doctrine onto these kids, you don't get to be a public school. They're not punishing you for being Catholic. They're punishing you because you don't want to play by the rules. So I don't really understand what the legal dilemma is here. And that's why it's so scary that the Supreme Court decided to take up this cause. Because what the hell do they have to say about all this? There's a bunch of church-state separation groups that weighed in on this week. The law is clear. This is Americans United, but they represent the ACLU, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and other groups. The law is clear. Charter schools are public schools and must be secular and open to all students. The Oklahoma Supreme Court correctly found that the state's approval of a religious public charter school was unlawful and unconstitutional. We urge the U.S. Supreme Court to affirm that ruling and safeguard public education, church-state separation, and religious freedom for all. Oklahoma taxpayers, including our plaintiffs, should not be forced to fund a religious public school that plans to discriminate against students and staff and indoctrinate students into one religion. Converting public schools into Sunday schools would be a dangerous sea change for our democracy. These groups, the church-state separation ones, they also sued to shut down that St. Isidore's school, but their lawsuit was actually put on hold after the state's attorney general filed his own lawsuit. That's the one that the Supreme Court of Oklahoma said, yeah, we agree with you, and this place needs to get shut down. So their lawsuit actually is kind of on pause for now. It doesn't matter. But that's why they're weighing in on that. And now the U.S. Supreme Court's going to hear it. This is what the right-wing legal group defending the Catholic charter school is saying. This is Alliance Defending Freedom. Oklahoma parents and children are better off with more educational choices, not fewer. Let's just pause there. They already have more educational choices. Parents in Oklahoma can send their kids to a private Catholic school. No one's stopping them. So what the hell are we talking about here? That's a lie. We need more choices. They have them. There's great irony in state officials who claim to be in favor of religious liberty, discriminating against St. Isidore because of its Catholic beliefs. They're not discriminating because of the beliefs. No one's trying to shut down private Catholic schools. What the hell? None of these people have the ability to tell the truth. The U.S. Constitution protects St. Isidore's freedom to operate according to its faith and supports the board's decision to approve such learning options for Oklahoma families. This right-wing group does not even mention that the board's decision to approve these options came because right-wing politicians shoved members onto the charter school board so that they could have a majority. We're pleased the U.S. Supreme Court will hear this case, which is of the utmost importance to families and children in Oklahoma and throughout the country. I am sure. Again, scary. You want to know what Ryan Walters said about all this? Of course you do. That's the superintendent of public instruction. He is the Christian nationalist who is still, I assume, very disappointed Donald Trump didn't pick him to be Secretary of Education. Look at his stupid statement. This is what Ryan Walters said about all this. It's a very short, this is from the oklahoma.gov website. This is like his official take. Parental choice in education is crucial. The entire country has eyes on Oklahoma to support St. Isidore and end state-sponsored atheism. What the hell is he talking about? Public schools are not state-sponsored atheism. I say this as an atheist, as a former public school teacher. What the hell? This guy just thinks any public school that's not actively pushing religion is state-sponsored atheism. If you teach kids about like Rosa Parks, that's state-sponsored atheism to Ryan Walters, because he's just Christian nationalism or bust. So that's Ryan Walters for you. I just want to, last thing I'll say here, when the Oklahoma Supreme Court knocked down this fake charter school, this is what they said in their decision. And I think it's worth repeating here. The St. Isidore contract violates the plain terms of Article 2, Section 5 of the Oklahoma Constitution, which says no public money goes to private religious anything. Enforcing the St. Isidore contract would create a slippery slope and what the framers warned against, the destruction of Oklahoma's freedom to practice religion without fear of government intervention. And that is a fair point. That's what we're trying to avoid, this slippery slope, because I don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do. The right thing is just to say the Oklahoma Supreme Court got it right and be done with it. What they could do is say, no, religious schools are totally allowed to be charter schools. And so, hey, across the country, go ahead and steal the bank accounts, go become charter schools. All these religious schools that rely on private school tuition, they would just become charter schools and steal money from the public coffers. That's what could happen. That's what is so scary. Amy Coney Barrett, by the way, she said she's recusing herself from this case. It actually said this when the Supreme Court took it up. You could see this at the very bottom. Justice Barrett took no part in the consideration or decision of these petitions. So she recused herself from the case. I think the reason is she was a professor at like Notre Dame Law School. She knows somebody very closely who is working with St. Isidore on this case. So good for her for recusing herself. But that still leaves a 5-3 majority of conservatives on the Supreme Court. Now, if it's a 4-4 tie, the Oklahoma Supreme Court's decision stands. But if all the conservatives who are left decide to upend what that Oklahoma Supreme Court said, this could be very, very bad. So again, put a bookmark in this. It'll be relevant again when they make the oral arguments in a few months, and even more important in like June when they announce the decision. So scary stuff. I'm going to leave it at that for now. And what other questions do we have here? Kevin, do you remember how many Catholics are on the Supreme Court? Oh boy. I cannot remember off the top of my head. I think it's a majority now, right? Like is it? Here we go. 6 Catholics, 2 Protestants, and 1 Jewish person. Is that with RGB or without? Because I think Ketanji Brown Jackson is Protestant, and I thought RBG was the only Jewish one. I'm not sure what Kagan is. Is she Jewish? I'm not sure. And Neil Gorsuch, actually, I don't know that he should be included in the Catholic bunch, because I think his religious beliefs are kind of weird. They're religious, but they're not nicely divided into something. So the answer is no, I don't know. But I don't remember it being this neatly divided. This is interesting. I feel like if there was a case involving an atheist group and church-state separation or something, and there was an open atheist on the court, a commenter is saying Elena Kagan is Jewish. So, okay, this may be correct. If there was an atheist lawsuit and there was an open atheist on the court, the right wing would be arguing that that atheist cannot hear the case because that person would be biased and they have prejudice on this case. No one is seriously arguing that every Catholic on the court should recuse themselves because this involves a Catholic school. Of course they wouldn't. I just find that double standard very telling. I mean, I would try to shut down Catholic private schools if they didn't report sexual abuse or just abuse. Fair point. There are plenty of stories about Catholic private schools shielding abuse, but also they fall under the purview of the Catholic Church. And there's plenty of horror stories about how the Catholic Church didn't do enough to protect students at Catholic schools. Like, those are not unusual. All right. I think that's it. So next week, I should be back on Friday night like normal. Thank you so much to Den for helping out with moderation and making my life so much easier and talking to all of you during the show. You can always support this channel by going to patreon.com/Hemant. And again, you could sign up for the newsletter right there. I got a very interesting story, I think, coming out tomorrow that I think you will enjoy. So go sign up if you haven't already. Otherwise, have a wonderful night. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you next week.